Welcome back to another Pausecast dedicated to supporting your efforts to pause during the day to recenter and help you develop inner peace. We are your hosts, Esther Lee Molyneux
and Dr. Ryan Stolworthy.
Welcome. Today we have a truly exceptional guest joining us. We will be sitting down with Claire Canfield, a renowned expert in the field of communication, hailing from Utah State University. Claire has dedicated his career to unraveling the intricacies of forgiveness, exploring how this profound act can transform lives, relationships, and even entire communities. His insights have been sought after by countless individuals and organizations seeking to find solace and healing through forgiveness.
In today's episode, we'll delve deep into the transformative power of forgiveness, exploring its significance, its challenges, and its potential to unlock inner peace. Claire will share his wealth of knowledge drawn from years of research and practical experience to help us navigate the journey towards forgiveness and the tranquility it can bring. Whether you're grappling with forgiveness in your personal life, seeking to understand its broader implications, or simply curious about its impact on our well-being, this episode is sure to provide valuable insights and guidance.
Claire, we are so excited to have you with us today on our podcast. Welcome, and we are positive our listeners are going to feel of your light and learn from your years of experience. So glad you're here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Claire, maybe you could give us some background of your education, your upbringing. That would be helpful, I think, for everybody to learn.
Sure. My name's Claire Canfield, and I grew up in a really small town in central Utah, Spring City. There were about 800 people there, and I lived about a mile and a half outside of town, so I had maybe 5 neighbors in a square mile. And we lived on 5 acres. It was like a little kind of gentleman's farm. We usually had pigs and chickens and maybe a couple cows and that type of thing. So grew up in a really small neighborhood and small town, and then I did a year of college at Snow College, a little junior college there, and then went to Weber State for my undergrad. Started teaching as an adjunct instructor after that, and doing that for a year and a half or so, I felt really drawn to continue pursuing teaching, so I went back and did a master's degree at the University of Montana. I did some doctoral work at the University of Utah, and that's where I got a graduate certificate in alternative dispute resolution and mediation. And now I'm at the Utah State University. I've been teaching there for about 9 years, and I think this is my 22nd year of teaching now. Wonderful. Yeah.
What was it that drew you to conflict resolution?
I was bad at it. That's what drew me to it, because I grew up not knowing how to manage conflict in any sort of healthy way, and so my default was to just start avoiding it completely. I had my idea or thought was that it was harmful for relationships, and I cared about my relationships a lot, so I didn't want to have any conflict. So I would pretend I didn't have any. Or if I did, I wouldn't talk about it. But as an undergraduate at Weber State, I was taking a communication course, and I started learning about different conflict styles. And when they said that avoiders were really low in their assertiveness towards their own needs, and it didn't help the relationship because you're not helping the other person's needs be met, I hated that idea. I tried to rationalize and justify why I was an avoider, and then I decided, I'll start dealing with my conflicts. And I knew I had one going on with my spouse. I hadn't said anything, but something was going on for like a month. I don't remember what it was, but one evening I was laying in bed, and we'd just, gone to bed, and the room was dark, and I'm just inches away from her, and I know I need to have this conversation, right? And I know what I probably ought to say even, and I could not get the words out of my mouth. I just laid there in the dark for like 2 hours, tormented by my inability to have a conversation around it. And so that drew me to pursue it further, because I knew I wasn't ever going to have the kind of relationships I wanted in my life if I didn't figure out how to have those types of difficult conversations, and I did not know how.
How can we help people want this? Because I think this is a fairly common experience for people in relationships, in the workplace,
Yeah.
just in the community,
Yeah.
with their neighbors.
You're right, it is common. It's unavoidable as long as people care. Like, conflict is a reflection of people caring about things and desiring some sort of change within themselves or their relationships or their communities, the world around them. And so as long as people keep caring, they're going to have conflict. It's normal. But many of us have had such negative experiences with it that we end up doing things like I did, which is just want to avoid it. So when you ask, like, how can we help people want this? It takes willingness, right? Ready to do something different than what we've always done. And there's two things that can help people develop willingness. One is beauty, and the other is affliction. And the affliction one, that's usually what drives me towards change, is after I've fallen on my face enough times, and it's painful enough. You've maybe heard the expression like rock bottom, or, I've thought to myself, I can't keep living like this. Like, that's the kind of affliction that can drive us to do something different. And for me, conflict was so uncomfortable that things had to get bad enough for me, not dealing with conflict, to override the discomfort I felt in managing conflict. So I realized that it's uncomfortable for people to engage in. But if we can lean into some of that discomfort and realize that that is like a message to ourselves of, like, I'm not happy or pleased with how things are going, like, I need to do something about this, or to see beauty. And there's actually an incredible amount of beauty that can come from conflict. It's how we can create the changes we want, live more in alignment with our values, be more connected to people, more at peace within ourselves. It's possible, but it takes a different approach than maybe how we've done it in the past.
Boy, you've already offered so many good morsels of wisdom. I'm just curious, oftentimes when I hear the word conflict, I'm thinking it's with somebody else.
Yeah.
But we also have inner conflict. And you just talked about how we have conflict because we care. So what do you recommend when we have that incongruence inside, like this self-conflict? I really care about something, I want something, but my actions are incongruent with my thoughts. So how do people align those two?
Yeah, we do have a tendency, I think, a lot of us, to think that there's an inner world and an outer world, right? And what's happening in here stays in here unless I share it with other people, right? And I can kind of protect that. But our lives are a lot more like a Mobius strip. Have you ever seen that shape before? It looks a little bit like a figure 8. But if you were to take like a piece of paper and it was colored differently on one side than the other, you take it and do a twist and put it back together. What it does is creates this kind of figure 8 looking thing. And if you run your finger on it, what is on the inside of it becomes the outside, and it wraps back into the inside to the outside. And that's much more of what our life is really like. It's not inside and outside, but what's going on within me will find its way out into my relational interactions. And what's happening there is going to have an influence on what's going on within me. And so being able to realize those are not two distinctly different things is really helpful. To know that, like, all conflict starts within me, and it doesn't
That's
require
really powerful.
anyone else.
All conflict starts within me.
And I want every conflict I have. People don't like hearing that the first time.
We both are just like,
need to
what?
elaborate on that.
Yes,
We
please.
want every conflict we have, because the conflict is emerging out of our values and the things we care about, right? We're having we're having an emotional reaction to things maybe not being how we desire them to be. And so when we start having conflict, it's because we want it. We want the change, but so often we think, well, conflict is happening because this person is behaving poorly, and if they would just be different, then I wouldn't have this conflict. Well, no, you have the conflict because you want it. And you may say you want the other person to be different, and then I would be fine. I wouldn't have conflict anymore. But that you have no control over that at all. And so
No
if
control.
you don't, you don't
No
have any
control.
control over other people's changes. You only have control over your own changes. And conflict helps you to see what you can change and what you can't.
I'm circling back around to this statement you're making that we want the conflict, because still inside me, I'm like, no, I do not.
Yeah. Yet, like, why would you have an emotional reaction unless that thing mattered to you? Like, we don't have emotions around stuff that we don't care about. If I drop a penny on the ground, I'm not concerned sometimes about even bending over and picking it up, because I place such little value on that that it doesn't bring up any emotion. It doesn't drive any behavioral change. I don't care. But where does conflict happen? In the places we care deeply about things, which is why they're most frequent within our families of origin and with our significant others. That's where we're having most of our conflicts, right?
So we're having the Utah Faith Summit, and the goal is to help religious leaders in whatever denomination that they serve in understand and help people in their mental health challenges. This is so helpful for them. What are the things that you think would be really helpful for religious leaders, as well as just even members of a congregation, to help people with mental health challenges like anxiety and depression?
Well, I'm not a mental health expert, and so I know that there are areas that some people need to have addressed by experts and by people who have a capacity to support them in those areas. Conflict, though, impacts people's emotions and their mental well-being on a pretty significant way, right? If you ask people who are in conflict how they're feeling, many times it's anxious, fearful, distressed. Like, these are common, strong emotions that people go through. And when you're feeling a lot of that, it's impacting how your overall mental health and wellness is in life. So when you can learn to approach conflict in a healthier way, it most definitely can have an impact on your overall well-being.
So I'm just wondering, this might be a good time to transition into another area of your expertise, which is forgiveness. And I think that also can tie in, as we're working with faith leaders and others, about the whole concept of forgiveness.
Yeah, I came to explore forgiveness because even though people are doing the very best that they can, oftentimes conflict begins because harm has been done, or in the process of being in conflict, people harm each other. I don't know if you're like me and you've maybe said a few things that you regretted.
Never.
Or done a few things that you've regretted. I had a neighbor at our first house when our kids were small that owned either a very large dog or a very small horse. I don't know which one it was, but this thing was gigantic, and when it would go outside, it would come over to our yard and leave presents on the lawn.
We follow.
And my spouse is not a a huge animal lover. They make her nervous, and so this was the largest dog she'd ever seen. So she didn't want to go outside, and she was scared for the kids to be out there. Like it could have eaten them whole, I think, if it wanted to. And I certainly didn't like mowing the lawn and coming across the presents. And so I was tasked with like going over and asking the neighbor to, do something about this. So I went and talked to her, and she's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Well, I'll keep the dog, out of your yard." We didn't have a fence in between it or anything like that, and the dog went where it wanted to. It kept happening, so I went over again, and she's like, "Oh, if that happens, you can just bring it over to my yard." And I was like, "Well, I'm not going to bring poop over to your yard, right?" But it kept happening, and I had a moment that was not my finest, where I was like, okay, so I scooped up one of them and I left it on the side doorstep of the kitchen.
The doorstep.
Yeah, that was not my finest hour. We have all done things, right? Perhaps in conflict that we don't feel proud of, or that has potentially done harm to someone else, even unintentionally. And so what do you do, even if the conflict in some way gets resolved or managed? What do you do with the hurt that happened? Yeah. And that's a pain, that's a suffering that sometimes people live with indefinitely if they don't know what to do with it. And I've seen, speaking of mental health, people carry the wounds that have been created by other people for their entire lives. And it's not because they want to carry them, it's because they don't know what else to do with it. So forgiveness became something that was really important to me, to know how to help deal with some of the aftermath that occurs in conflict.
So what is forgiveness?
That's a tricky question, because when you say what is forgiveness, most people think they already know. It's a word that many people are familiar with, particularly within faith traditions. And within Abrahamic faith traditions, it's a crucial idea and concept. But we lack the proper language to differentiate the kind of forgiveness that is sometimes talked about within spiritual or faith traditions versus the type of forgiveness that happens person to person, not person to a deity. And because we don't have any language to distinguish those two things, they get conflated together in a way that creates sometimes impossible barriers for people to overcome. And they don't know how to forgive others because they are thinking about it in a way that blocks them from being able to do it. And this is true with other ideas that we have where we lack sufficient language. Like if you think about the word love, that is a deeply meaningful word to many people, but it doesn't mean the same thing depending on how you use it. Like you were talking about, you have a child who's going to be graduating.
Yeah.
I suspect you have a lot of love for your child.
And a lot
right?
of tears.
Yeah.
Mixed emotions.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. You also have some nice shoes on. Do you love those shoes? Or ice cream, or like we use the word love in a variety of different ways.
Sure.
And it's not the same meaning, even though we're using the same word. And with forgiveness, we're using that word, but we may not understand what it actually means. And that misunderstanding doesn't allow us to think about it in a way that we can actually move through it and gain the benefits of what it can offer. So that is a challenge when you're like, what is forgiveness? Well, I'll start with like what it isn't, because I have to explain what it isn't to people because so many people think it is something that it's not. For example, it's not reconciliation. Sometimes people think, I can't forgive this person because I don't want to have any sort of contact or relationship with them, which is wise in some situations, right?
Sure.
And it would be potentially harmful to reconnect or open yourself back up to this person who might have betrayed you. So if I think that forgiveness means reconciliation, why would I ever consider forgiveness? And when you think again about kind of the faith traditions that where forgiveness is such an important principle when we're talking about a reconciliation between a human and their higher power, that's how we understand part of what forgiveness is doing, right? It's reconciling. But here, it is not that. And if I think it's reconciliation, I'm not going to want to do it. And the forgiveness process is not reconciliation. It's also not for the offender. It's for me. We sometimes think, I don't want to forgive this person because I can't just let them off the hook, right? I can't condone what was done, and it shouldn't be condoned. And if I think forgiveness is condoning the behavior, why would I ever forgive? Forgiveness is also not a performative act. Communication is really important to me, and communication can be performative, meaning it does something. So when you say it, it does the thing. Like when two people are standing there and they say I do to each other, they're performing the marriage contract in like a legally binding way. It's performative. But when you say I forgive you to someone, it doesn't actually do anything. It's just words. And sometimes even people use I forgive you as a weapon. Have you ever had somebody be like, oh, I forgive you for what you for what you've done, right? And it's almost like a way to hold it over your head. That's not what forgiveness is. And you don't actually have to say anything to go through the forgiveness process. You don't have to have a conversation with the person who harmed you. It's a process that is for you. So, again, it's a complicated question to say what is forgiveness because of how many misconceptions there are about what it is and what it isn't. But when you understand what it actually is as a process that can transform feelings of anger, harm, betrayal that we hold in us, and that it's a transformation into feelings of beneficence towards the offender, then we start to see what a powerful process it can be to heal us and benefit us, even though harm has been done.
So forgiveness is obviously a very complex
Yes.
process. If there was one or maybe two things that you could say that might be able to benefit a person today about forgiveness, what would it be?
One, you're not alone in this. Oftentimes the suffering and harm that occurs to us when we've been betrayed, when we've been harmed, when we've been dehumanized by someone else, can make us feel very isolated and alone. And I would say that you are not alone. A lot of people are suffering with this. And knowing that we're not alone sometimes can help us to feel some hope that it might be possible to heal from some of the things that have occurred to us. And be patient with yourself as you go through it. Forgiveness isn't a process to try and rush through. Many people realize when they're stuck in some of those emotions that they don't want to keep feeling like that all the time. So they think, well, I just have to forget about it, which is not what forgiveness is. It's not forgetting. Or I just need to move past this and let it go. And to try and do so, even though well-intentioned, likely won't work and might even do harm. We might start to think, well, what's wrong with me if I can't get over this, or I can't let it go? And maybe I'm going to start minimizing it and trying to pretend like it wasn't such a big deal. And that's denying our own value and humanity to do that. Like be patient with yourself and understand that it's a process, and you have to uncover the anger that you've experienced. You have to make a choice to go through forgiveness, because it's a courageous act. It's not an easy thing to do. And so when we realize it hasn't been helping me to just bury these emotions, hasn't been helping me to try and just pretend like it didn't happen, well, then I might be able to go through the tough emotional work to look at all of the things that this causes me to feel, right? And to be able to do the work of understanding how that could have happened, develop compassion for the offender, and to discover some of the gifts that can come through the forgiveness process, because it's remarkable what can come out of it. For me, I discovered meaning in suffering, and suffering doesn't have to be meaningless. I also discovered some purposes for my own life. It was really surprising to me to come out of my first really significant forgiveness process that I was trying to go through, and realize that I wanted to share it with other people. Like, that became part of my purpose in life, was I want to teach people about the beauty of this process and how healing it can be. And that was really surprising to me. There's so much that we can discover and gain by going through it, if we understand it. And the phase model that I'm referring to is from Robert Enright. He's got a book called Forgiveness is a Choice that's really useful in walking people through that.
Boy, I have several follow-up questions. So first of all, my professional background is working with people who have experienced victimization in some way, shape, or form. If it's child abuse, if it's sexual assault, if it's bullying, etc. And in working with clients, and even having some of these experiences myself of just wanting to forgive, understanding maybe some of the benefits, and then I feel like I've extended that forgiveness, but then a trigger comes up. And so, and then feelings come back, like these negative emotions, and then there's a question, did I actually forgive that person or myself? Because I thought I did, but now it feels like I didn't. Yeah.
That's a great realization, and if you can feel that, then you're right. Yeah, you didn't. And that's not because you didn't try or that you did something wrong, but those emotions are still there. And forgiveness, you know it's done when all of that gets transformed and they aren't there anymore. You don't have to keep carrying the anger indefinitely. And people's best attempts, when they don't know actually how to go through the forgiveness process, is to bury that anger deep enough that they think it's gone, which is often what we're doing when we bury stuff, right? Is putting it deep enough that we think it's no longer there. Whether that is nuclear waste or maybe the body that we're trying to hide in the backyard. Those are maybe some darker examples, but why are we burying that stuff? We don't want it to be seen. We don't want to look at it. We want to pretend like it doesn't exist anymore. And I understand, like, wanting to pretend like that anger and that pain doesn't exist anymore. And if I can just bury it deep enough, then it'll be gone. But as you know, it's never gone, right? And when you are in the grocery store and you round the corner and you see that person, what emotions are flooding through your body, right? You mentioned, like, they get triggered back. Well, they were there.
Right.
You had just buried it so deep that you thought it was gone, but they're still there. And some people can't drive down a road and pass by a certain vehicle, make, model, and color without rushing right back into those emotions, or to hear a song on the radio, or smell a certain thing. Like, sometimes we go so deep to bury those things that we'll change all of our behaviors to avoid remembering or feeling those things again. Like maybe I'm never going to eat at a certain restaurant ever again, or go into a certain part of town, because I'm just looking to keep that stuff buried. So that's a good recognition that if that comes rushing back, you haven't gone through the forgiveness process fully, because it hasn't yet been transformed. And you'll know you've gone through it all the way when you no longer have the anger there. You have feelings of beneficence towards the offender, not feelings of anger and bitterness. And
So what is the common step that most people don't follow through with forgiveness to, like thinking that they have, but they see somebody, there's a trigger, and all of those feelings come back. They really haven't forgiven the person or the event or whatever.
Yeah.
What is the most common one that most people struggle with?
Sarah, if I can interject too, I think it's really important to understand the trauma response. Right? Because there's psychological things and neurochemistry going on that does take people back to these difficult situations, almost like they're reliving it. So maybe answer those two in conjunction, if you would.
Yeah. So I'll start with, going back to that misunderstanding of what forgiveness is. Oftentimes, where people are getting stuck is they're doing the best they can under their current understanding of what forgiveness is. And so if I think forgiveness is forgetting, then I'm doing everything that I can to just forget the thing. And that leaves me stuck, right? Because that's not actually what forgiveness is, and I can't forget, and things will remind me, and I'm right back to where I thought I was before, right? Or they get stuck in thinking that it happens through just the passing of time, that time heals all wounds, and it's been long enough, and so I don't have to worry about it anymore. I kind of thought that, and then, like, for example, I got bullied as a kid. I rode the bus to and from school like 20 minutes, or it was like 40 minutes each way. And I was the new kid in town because I didn't have 3 generations of people living there. And I think I was different than most kids, and I struggled, and I had some bullies that took advantage of that. And that was years ago. But when I found out that my oldest daughter was getting bullied in first grade, it all came back. And I was feeling both the anger towards her bullier and also mine from years before. So people get stuck not because they aren't trying, but because oftentimes they just don't understand what the process looks like. And that is the challenge, right? Is learning and understanding what it looks like to move through forgiveness.
So I am also curious, you've talked a little bit about burying past feelings, and sometimes there may be religious leaders who say just bury it and move on. And then on the different end of the continuum, there's a book, Feelings Buried Alive Never Die. And I'm more like on that end because I do feel like there needs to be resolve. So how do people navigate when they're receiving these very different pieces of information and different counsel that don't quite align, but their intentions are so good, and they want to move on, and they don't want to be stuck anymore, and they want to forgive?
Yeah, and I think you're right in recognizing that when people are in situations to help those who are struggling, they have good intentions and they're trying to be helpful as best they can. We also know like hell is paved with good with good intentions, right? So our good intentions don't necessarily mean we have a good impact on people. And so when we can separate those two things and realize that people who are trying to help, who have good intentions, can also have a negative impact, and that doesn't mean that their intentions were negative, but it doesn't change the fact that the impact is not helpful. So the more that we can learn to be helpful in ways that truly support those who are struggling, then I'm always hopeful that we can improve in our capacity to have the impact on others that we want to have.
So in the process of forgiveness, it seems like with everything that you've talked about, a person has achieved forgiveness when they're feeling a beneficence for whatever hurt them in the past.
I can feel compassion, I can feel caring, I can have kind feelings towards someone who dehumanized me.
How can they achieve that?
Yeah. So it's sometimes helpful for me to define forgiveness in this way. Okay? When someone dehumanizes us, it's a deeply painful experience to be treated like an object, to feel like we aren't somehow a part of the human experience, or that we're less worthwhile than others are. It's that dehumanization is what is so painful. So forgiveness is the process of reclaiming our humanity by rehumanizing the person who took ours. Because when someone dehumanizes us, we have to make sense of how that could happen. Because how is it that people can do harm to each other? Like, we are all a part of this human experience. So to harm each other doesn't make really any sense at all. And our brain has to make sense of it. So what we naturally do is, if you did me harm, there must be something wrong with your character or your intent. You had to have meant to do that, or you have to have some sort of character deficiency to have dehumanized me. So we start to think of that offender as being evil, ignorant, right? You can just start to, if you think about some of your own perhaps grudges that you might be holding from the past, how do you think about that person? We usually think of them in those kind of more dehumanizing ways because they dehumanized us. It's a natural kind of reciprocal response. It makes perfect sense why we do that. So in order for me to regain a full sense of my own humanity, it takes doing the work to rehumanize the person that hurt me. And it's not to let them off the hook or say it was okay that you did it, but just so that I can come back to a place where I can feel those types of emotions towards my fellow human beings, even though they are imperfect and they do harm to me. Because I'm a better person when I'm not weighed down by bitterness, anger, and hatred towards others. Because when I have that in me, which is a normal response to what happened, it's doing me harm, which is why holding a grudge is sometimes referred to as drinking poison and hoping the other person will die. Like, it's harming it's harming me, it's harming my relationships. I have a harder time trusting or connecting with people. There are so many harmful things that happen to me personally when I'm holding a grudge. So the forgiveness process allows me to transform all of that, to have this type of different emotion towards people. And, you know, if we want to look at a faith-based approach, loving people who love us is really easy. Loving people who are not kind to us, who we might consider our enemy, is actually really challenging. And I think forgiveness process is the thing that allows us to do that. It helps us rehumanize those people that have done us harm. And when I can do that, when I get to the point where that's what I feel towards that person, then I know I've gone all the way through the process. And I know I haven't laid out exactly what that looks like in our conversation yet. So I'm happy to do that if that's useful.
Please, yeah.
So Enright talks about the 4 phases of forgiveness. And the first phase is just uncovering our anger. Because again, our natural response, if we don't know what to do with the anger, which should be there, like if we stop being angry about people dehumanizing us or doing us harm or doing harm to other people, like, shouldn't I be angry that some kid was harming my daughter and bullying her at school? Yes, because that's not okay. And anger is a very energy-filled emotion that can help us act. It can help us protect others. It can help us to create the changes that we need to have. Like, how do we make schools safer from bullying, right? That's not an easy thing to do. And sometimes anger is there to give us the energy to start taking actions. But when we don't know what to do with it, and our many experiences with anger have been like, well, you dehumanized me, I'm angry, so I'm going to lash out in anger and do harm to you like you did harm to me. Now we're just in a cycle of dehumanization, right? So when we don't understand what anger is about, giving us energy to create change, or if we've seen it happen in negative ways, it's natural, we're going to bury it. I'm going to bury it down because I don't know what to do with it. So the first phase in Enright's model is like, we have to uncover it and bring it up and understand why we're angry and why that was there, and see when we have buried it, right? Has it changed the way I see the world? Has it changed my behavior? Has it, caused me to have physical impacts? People lose sleep, their health is... So when we start asking ourselves these questions and uncovering that anger, we can see that it's there and that it didn't go away just because I buried it really deep. Mm-hmm. And then the second phase is to choose, decide if we want to forgive. And what can help us with that is understanding what forgiveness is and what it isn't, seeing the barriers that we have there, and then making a choice so that we can move into the work of forgiveness. Many people think that I can't forgive because the other person didn't apologize, they're not penitent. You actually don't need that in order to forgive, but it takes work on our part to do it. So we have to work on understanding, how did it happen? What were the circumstances that can explain how they could have dehumanized me, that isn't dependent upon their character or their ill intentions? So with my daughter's bully, I had to start to understand something about, like, how could he have done that to her? So I started learning about bullying, and guess what I learned about bullying? Most bullies have been bullied, right? I started to learn that he was probably under really challenging circumstances, right? And the more I understood how he could have done that other than just being a bad little kid, it started to shift the emotions I had around it. And then I worked on trying to have compassion for him, right? What must it be like to be in that kind of pain as a little kid and not know what to do with it? And I think he liked my daughter. What must it be like to not know how to form healthy relationships? How to express yourself in a way that doesn't feel scary or overwhelming? And my emotions kept changing. And I got to the point where I no longer felt anger towards him. I just felt compassion. And when I think about it now, even, like, I think about that kid, and I don't have any more of the anger. And I was enraged when I found out about it. But it took some time. And that same process has caused me to feel differently about the kid that bullied me. I went through that same thing with him. And that, going through it, allowed me to start to see how I can apply that process throughout my life, because I'm not done being harmed. Nobody gets to walk this world without experiencing that. As Hemingway said, the world breaks everybody. But some grow stronger in the broken places. And I think forgiveness helps us grow strong in ways that we didn't even imagine.
And the family is a great laboratory for this, right?
Yep.
It's a great place of relationships. And it's interesting because just thinking about it, it seems like if you can step back in those relationships, which can be, your hurt can be really deep, because why would somebody that you love and care about hurt you like this?
Yeah.
But it also seems like you could come to these places quicker, maybe, because you understand the person a little bit better in a family, but it seems like it doesn't happen very much in families. There's a lot of generational trauma that continues to be repeated over and over again through different generations of families.
Yeah, one of the most significant forgiveness processes for me was with my father. And my father loved me, and he did the absolute best that he could in raising me. My father also did harm to me in a way that I didn't know what to do with it for years, right? And if other people's families are anything like mine, we joke about our childhood trauma, right? Like that was one of the ways we tried to deal with it, is we would laugh about it, right?
So you siblings?
Siblings and even parents, right? It's like, oh, remember the time I got spanked for this, right? And so I'm like laughing about this thing that was actually deeply painful for me.
I'm starting to have all these flashbacks about things that I've done to my kids.
And again, his intent wasn't necessarily to dehumanize. I know my dad loved me, right? And that's what made it so hard, is I felt guilty about harboring anger and hurt towards him. I thought, well, I'm a bad son for feeling this way. And that's one of the reasons why some people have a hard time going into the forgiveness process, because they have to face their own pain, their own guilt, their own sense of shame around it. Because even though you may have done nothing to deserve that, like a little kid, any little kid that gets abused in any way doesn't deserve it. They didn't want that to happen. They didn't do anything. But you ask any kid that's been abused whether they feel guilt or shame over it, and they do. They all do. So that's one of the things that's hard to face, is like, well, what is wrong with me that this thing happened? And that's so hard to look at. And sometimes we don't know how to look at it. And I didn't for years. But I got to the point where I started to feel so uncomfortable in like family gatherings. I felt small. I felt like a little kid again. I wasn't articulate. I was like, I don't know how many years of school at this point, right? I teach all the time, and I can't put words together around my dad. I just feel small. And it made me not want to be around them. And it made me agitated and anxious before and after these events. And I was like, what is going on? And then I started looking, and I'm like, oh yeah, I am holding some really strong feelings towards my dad. And so that was the beginning point for me of walking into that process with him. And it was one of the most important and most healing things for me to do, because now I can have a different kind of relationship with my father, because I'm not still holding that stuff. And I haven't.
So liberating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm just reflecting on some dear friends that I have in my life who have had family members who have died from suicide. And as you're talking about these feelings of guilt and shame and anger, and then the stages, I think it's really important to realize too that, these stages can apply to people who are no longer with us,
Yes.
or even to ourselves.
Yes.
Right? And these feelings are natural and normal. But regardless, I feel like there's this spectrum of pain, and perhaps how that pain is defined is based on our own values and life experiences. But you might think of somebody like a stranger who might have said something that felt hurtful to you versus a spouse who died from suicide. I mean, but the process is essentially the same. The pain just might be more comprehensive or deep, or
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's good to recognize, how deeply some people are hurting around this. And the forgiveness process doesn't require anyone else to go through, but sometimes we need support. Like we might need a professional that knows how to help us navigate some of those emotions or the trauma. Or we might need somebody that we can trust just to be there with us and witness the strong emotions that we felt, right? And to just let us know that like we're not alone through it. Many of us need that kind of support. And the support doesn't come from like, you should do this or forget about it or just move on. It comes from sitting with us in the pain, right? Just walk with us for a while. Be with us as we're trying to work through those kind of things. That's sometimes the most helpful gift that you can offer.
And I feel like what you just said is critical, because sometimes people don't know what to say, they don't know what to do, but your advice from your decades of experience is to be with them, walk with them, care for them,
be
love
present,
them,
be a
present.
witness.
It's a real Judeo-Christianity thing that is taught repeatedly, right? I mean, sharing another's burden, comforting those that need to be comforted, and mourning with those that are mourning.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is just being present with them. It's almost like going to a hospital to visit somebody.
Yes.
They've been hurt, they're healing, they're recovering. You know that is going to take time. You're not going there to do any rapid changes. People are already trying to help them heal fast.
Yeah.
But you're just there.
Yeah, and that's something everybody can do. You don't have to have any sort of expertise or particular knowledge to offer to just be with somebody, right? To listen to them, to witness them.
Not solve any problem.
Nope. Nope. And I get the good intent behind everybody wanting to solve each other's problems. It just might not be having the kind of impact we think it is.
And I think I would throw some encouragement out there that if we are the ones who are suffering and mourning, to allow people to be with us. You know, take down those walls of pride or I've got this, and perhaps recognizing that I am suffering and you know, maybe you can't solve my problems, but I will allow you to be with me.
Yeah, it's hard to ask for help, but it's offering something both to yourself and the other person. I know so many times when people sit with me and they share their strong emotions, and I'm not unfamiliar with tears. Guess what the first thing people usually say when they start crying?
I'm sorry.
They
I'm
apologize.
So sorry, yeah.
Almost without fail, they apologize, as if, and then they say, I don't want to burden you. And it's not a burden to be a witness, right? It's a gift to see people more fully about what they care about, to be able to see their full humanity, even in their pain, right? And that's a gift that they're offering me. And I can offer the gift to them of like, yep, I'll be here and I'll see it, and you're not alone.
It's beautiful.
Very.
Well said. Well, Claire, we are excited that you will be joining us at the Utah Faith Summit on mental health, and people can come and learn more from you. I feel like this is probably the tip of the iceberg, what you have to offer and what you've learned over time, but we're so grateful for your time and talents and expertise. And I hope that people who listen to this can feel of your passion. It's been very evident to me today.
Thank you.
So thank
Thank
you.
you. Thanks
Thank
for
you
letting
so
me share
much.
with you today.
Yeah.
Yeah.